Celtic Myths and Legends by T.W. Rolleston. Chapter 8, Myths and Tales of the Cymry. Conclusion. Here we end this long survey of the legendary literature of the Celt. The material is very abundant, and it is, of course, not practicable in a volume of this size to do more than trace the main current of the development of the legendary literature drawn to the time when the mythical and legendary element entirely faded out and free literary invention took its place. Now, I know James George Fraser's The Golden Bough is not entirely a Celt thing, but if I had it, I would, I'd present all 12 volumes. The reader of these pages will, however, it is hoped, have gained a general conception of the subject which will enable him to understand the significance of such tales as we have not been able to touch on here, and to fit them into their proper places in one or the other of the great cycles of Celtic legend. It will be noticed that we have not entered upon this vast region of Celtic folklore. Folklore has not been regarded as falling within the scope of the present work. Folklore may sometimes represent degraded mythology, and sometimes mythology in the making. In either case, it is its special characteristic that it belongs to and issues from a class whose daily life lies close to the earth, toilers in the field and in the forest, who render with simple directness, in tales or charms, their impressions of natural or supernatural forces with which their own lives are envisioned. Mythology, in the proper sense of the word, appears only where the intellect and the imagination have reached a point of development above that which is ordinarily possible to the peasant mind, where men have begun to coordinate with their scattered impressions and have felt the impulse to shape them into poetic creations embodying universal ideas. It is not, of course, pretended that a hard and fast line can always be drawn between mythology and folklore. Still, the distinction seems to be a valid one, and I have tried to observe it in these pages. Mythology has its meaning, it has its purpose, and it doesn't mean it's not true. Just like the consciousness of my stomach growling at me. Well, it can point me towards what is good for it or not. And mythology is like that too. After the two historical chapters with which our study has begun, the object of the book has been literary rather than scientific. I have, however, endured to give, as the opportunity arose, such results of recent critical work on the relics of Celtic myth and legend as may at least serve to indicate to the reader the nature of the critical problems connected therewith. I hope that this may have added somewhat to the value of the work for students, while not impairing its interest for the general reader. Furthermore, I may claim that this book is, in this sense, scientific, that as far as possible it avoids any adaptation of its material for the popular taste. Such adaptation, when done for an avowed artistic purpose, is, of course, entirely legitimate. If it were not, we should have to condemn half the great poetry of the world. And my thousands of poems is definitely sufficient reason for my channel to exist, isn't it? But here the object has been to present the myths and legends of the Celt as they actually are. Crudities have not been refined away. Things painful or monstrous have not been suppressed, except in some few instances where it has been necessary to bear in mind that this volume appeals to a wider audience than that of scientific students alone. The reader may, I think, rely upon it that he has here a substantially fair and not over-idealized account of the Celtic outlook upon life and the world at a time when the Celt still had a free, independent natural life, working out his conceptions in the Celtic tongue and taking no more from foreign sources than he could assimilate and make his own. See, cultural assimilation is perfectly fine. The legendary literature thus presented in the oldest non-classical literature of Europe, And this alone is sufficient, I think, to give it a strong claim on our attention. As to what other claims it may have, many pages might be filled with quotations from the discerning praises given to it by critics not only of Celtic nationality, but from Matthew Arnold downwards. But here let it speak for itself. It will tell us, I believe, that as Muldoon said of one of the marvels he met with in his voyage into fairyland, what we see here was a work of mighty men. And the glossary and index is going to be shared in at least 3 programs, so bear with me before I switch over to the Arthurian legends.